Ranking the Saints NFL draft needs with, after further review, Matt Moscana. And this young man right here with the hair, Sean Fazende, who the hell knows, from Fox 8 New Orleans, sports anchor. I think the draft needs are pretty simple. I think the ranking is pretty simple as well. I would go number one, numero uno, would be pass rusher. Edge, defensive end, however you want to phrase it. Pass rusher is 1. 2 would be offensive line. Those are the main two. Like, those are 1 and 2. 3 for me would be draft capital. So controversial yet brave option. But I think our biggest need in the draft is players. Our biggest need in the draft is picks. We have a first round pick, a second round pick. Then you skip 3, skip 4, you go to 5. And we got a ton of picks in the 5th round and 7th round. So we got to be able to pull and extract some picks out of the middle rounds.
Look at the approach to this year's draft. I think the consensus is they got to go tackle, got to go offensive line at 14. Are you in that category?
I very much am.
Okay, that part I don't agree with. I hate that. I cannot stand whenever that's the mindset. I cannot stand it when it's like, the consensus is you got to go tackle at 14. Why? Why pigeonhole yourself into going offensive lineman / tackle, pigeonholing yourself even more at 14? Why is that the consensus? Why isn't the consensus you can trade down? Why isn't the consensus best player available? Why isn't the consensus, hey, if Dallas Turner falls, you take Dallas Turner? Like, I cannot stand that line of thinking. I can't stand whenever, because it's so lazy. It really is. It's so lazy. There's no creativity at all to that thinking, where it's like, we need an offensive lineman. Boom, you just take one at 14. You can do so many different things, so I definitely don't agree with that, even though I agree that it's one of our 2 biggest needs, sure. But you can trade down, you can take an end, you can take an edge, you can take Brock Bowers if he slides. You never know who's going to slide in that position. You can trade down, like I said. 2 birds with 1 stone. You trade down, you get picks in the middle rounds, and you can still get your guys. So I definitely don't think we should go ahead and write in that we're taking a tackle at 14.
I just don't see the way they attack free agency, or I guess you could call a lack of attack in free agency, with a more moderate, tempered approach. I don't see how you could avoid it, considering the hole you have at not 1, but possibly 2 tackle positions, because you just don't know what's going to happen with Ramczyk, and you don't know who's going to actually settle in at left tackle. This is a year, fortunately for them, slight silver line. It's a decent spot for them to land a very good tackle in the first round of the draft. But unlike in years past, I think this year, I don't think they have much of a choice. I think they've got to go tackle.
False, Sean. You do have a choice. I just laid it out to you. Actually, this year, more so than other years, you have a choice. This year, more than usual, because this year, you have a very top-heavy draft. You have people kind of going quarterback and wide receiver at the top end, and then all of the value players like Brock Bowers and maybe even Dunze or Malik Neighbors or players like that. Dallas Turner, like I said, those players are going to slide. So more than ever, this is the time where you may want to sit back and say, well, let's take a look at the board. Let's take a look at what happens before we just take random tackle at 14.
To address their biggest vulnerability.
You think they move up?
No. I don't think there's any reason to move up. That's the one thing I don't think you do, is move up. I mean, I can't imagine a situation where you would move up. Like, who would you move up for? And I've heard people say you move up with the Jets. The Jets are at 10. So you go from 14 to 10 for what? Who's there? Is that Bowers? Are you going to, you're going to go from not even taking a tight end to now we're going to give more draft capital to trade up and take Bowers? You definitely don't trade up for a tackle, because there's a million different tackles in the first round. Like, you don't have to trade up to get one. If Joe Alt slides to 10 and you think he's far and away the best tackle, do you trade up to get him? I don't know. I mean, it's still, we need draft picks. Like, we need to fill the roster with cheap rookie contracts. So, I mean, I don't see a situation where you trade up. It would have to be something crazy happens. Like, I'm just going to make something up. It would have to be I'm not going to say this. I was going to say if Jay and Daniels falls. It would have to be something like if Joe Alt falls to 10 and we're sitting there like, wow, we can throw next year's third, go up from 14 to 10, take Alt. If that's the case, maybe. But without doing all kind of crazy trades and all kind of crazy stuff happening in the draft, I don't think there's any situation where you trade up.
Possibly, they always have at some point in the draft. I don't know if it's going to happen in the first round. I think it could happen possibly on day 3, to be honest with you. But it's always possible for them to move up with either a future pick or.
I think we will move. I hope so. I think we move some of our picks at the end of the draft, some of next year's picks, to get us into that 3rd or 4th round, where there we could take a quarterback. I think there you could see us take Jordan Travis or Michael Pratt or something like that.
I mean, they got the 45th overall pick. I don't know how far up they would have to go if they want to use the second round pick. I'm not sure. I'd be a huge fan of that, but nonetheless, I think it's certainly possible if they want to go up a few spots, throw in a 5th round or a pick next year to go up and get a guy that may be slipping and falling that could, potentially be one of their guys.
What would be interesting is if I'm just going to do hypotheticals here, but wouldn't it be interesting if we got Bowers at 14 and then we traded up with our second pick or did something there and then took Ladd McConkey? Wouldn't that be crazy? Because then we wouldn't be addressing either of those, either the offensive line or defensive end or edge or whatever. I feel like defensive end is such an old way of saying it. Edge, I guess, is the new way of saying it. But if we walked out of our first 2 picks with Bowers and McConkey, would you be upset? I wouldn't be upset. You'd have to get really creative, because then it's like, okay, well, we just threw these 2 top 50 picks in there. We've got some serious playmakers, but we need some edge. We need someone to rush the passer. We need to find some help. Now we got to get really good. We have to be really good in what we do in rounds 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which includes us maneuvering to even get those picks. So that's why I always say, like, don't just pigeonhole yourself into a position, because it eliminates those interesting situations where, do I think they'll take Bowers and McConkey? No. Do I think they should? No. But it would be an interesting problem to have. If you're sitting there saying, we think we just drafted Travis Kelce and Cooper Kupp, we'll figure out the rest later, that would be pretty interesting.
It doesn't just they don't just draft, but potentially be a guy that starts from day one, because I think that also has to factor in as well.
Sean, it's so interesting. Last year before the draft, we all kind of knew there was like this consensus, like they were going to draft a running back somewhere. Like we all knew what a need that was. People talked about Kendre Miller. There was a lot of talk about, help me, the running back from Tulane. I'm blanking on his name.
Tajay
Spears. Thank you. It was at Tennessee now.
Different level.
We talked so much about that as like a 1A, 1B need. Do you see a position like that this year for New Orleans where you're like, man, I would be fall over stunned if they didn't take someone at that position, outside of offensive tackle, which we all think they'll probably do at 14?
Yeah, edge, offensive line. And then after that, you are filling the roster. The Saints need talent at every single position once you get past offensive line and edge. So if you draft a wide receiver, I'm cool with that. If you draft a running back, is probably the only position where it's like, that one doesn't make much sense. But like the tackle from Texas, the defensive tackle from Texas, who was just arrested for, I think, DUI. Let's say he falls. So he's a first-round pick right now. Let's say he falls into the 3rd round or second round, 3rd round. And let's say you can trade up and get him. And so now let's say you go Jared Verse round 1. You go offensive lineman round 2. You trade up and take him, the Texas defensive tackle, in round 3. All of a sudden now, that's looking real nice. But are we going to sit here and say, oh, we definitely should have taken a defensive tackle? No, but you just got to, at that point, figure out where the best player is, where the value is, and start filling the roster, because we do have holes everywhere.
But I think if you were to ask, people would say edge pass rusher, but the more I look at the depth at the pass rushing position, the more, yes, of course you could add at that position, but I'm not sure it's the glaring need with the investment in Chase Young, and I know there's the health scare, but you've invested so much in that position. I think they got 6 or 7 guys at edge pass rusher. If there were the next need for me, it would be defensive tackle, to be honest with you, because they lost.
So far ahead. I mean, it really is so far ahead.
Malcolm Roach. He's not I think it's probably an underrated loss. They're not very deep at that position. It's not an easy position to find. You mentioned last year's draft. I mean, that was the position they targeted, defensive tackle, but I still think you can add some depth there. Other than that, you can look at the wide receiver position. You can look at maybe the tight end position, but I would think offensive tackle just jumps off the top of the page, obviously. And if I were going, it would probably be defensive tackle with the investment of Chase Young at defensive end, and plus the track record of, frankly, swinging and missing at that position.
So
What about swinging and missing an offensive line?
Saunders, Shepard, Brazee, and you're thinking, okay, who's someone else that could be in that rotation on the interior?
Yeah, I mean, like Matt just said, like, we got depth at defensive. We got depth at our interior defensive line. We have depth at our outside, at the edge. Problem is, we got a bunch of average players. So I don't really care where the player fits as long as we get a good player, as long as we get an impactful player. If we get an outside linebacker who ends up being a Pro Bowler, fine. If we get a safety who ends up being a Pro Bowler, fine. Like if we get Cooper DeJean, ends up being the best the cornerback out of Iowa, ends up being the best cornerback in the NFL, fine. Go find those players. That's why I'm saying don't box yourself in. We need help everywhere. We need to elevate the roster. The biggest problem with the Saints right now is that we have an average roster. That's it. We also have a salary cap restriction. So the easiest way to handle those two situations is to draft impact positions and put them on rookie deals. We shouldn't be trying to get depth at positions. We shouldn't be trying to, find development players or whatever. We should be trying to find players who are going to make a legitimate impact for a long time in the NFL. That's how we should be attacking the draft. And I think it sounds simple, but a lot of teams don't do that. A lot of teams attack the draft with, we need depth at interior defensive line. We need we've heard it already this year. We've heard, we need a big physical wide receiver to replace Michael Thomas. Why put yourself in that position? Why put yourself in that pigeonhole and say, we need to find a physical receiver to replace Michael Thomas? Instead, you should say, let's go find an all-pro. That's it. Let's go find a future all-pro. Let's go find a future best at his position in the NFL. Let's go find a really talented player, and we'll figure the rest out. We don't have to find a carbon copy of Michael Thomas. We don't have to figure out who's going to replace Cam Jordan when he retires. Just go find all-pro players. Take a shot at players who are going to really make an impact for the organization moving forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that would be it. Absolutely. Because, you rotate those guys a lot. B, look, I like Brazee. I think he's got a high ceiling, and I think he can get there, but he's not there yet. I think Saunders is a decent player, and Shepard is a guy who's a veteran. He's over 30 years old. But, you need some young talent up at that position. So I think that's a spot you can come in and draft a guy that can get work themselves into the rotation.
You've covered this team and the organization so long. A lot of times when you're that close, sometimes you know what they're thinking, even if they don't say it. So I'm curious, do you think, is there maybe this component, Sean, where Dennis Allen knows he's a good defensive coordinator and they're going to be fine defensively, but they got to make the offensive thing work with Derek Carr because of the investment they made and everything there. So maybe they lean heavily. That's why I keep looking at them going, wide receiver, tight end. They got to get Derek Carr weapons. So, I look at 45 and I go, in a deep wide receiver draft, they're going to be somebody that's really good on the board at 45. Maybe that's the direction they go. Do you think that's part of the thought process with Allen and Loomis this year?
That could be part of the thought process where you're like, look, we just took Brian Brazee. We've got a defense who we do have rotational players. We do have Chase Young. We do have some of these guys we brought in last year, like Kalen Saunders. We do have a decent secondary. We do have Tyrann Mathieu and Marshawn Lattimore. Maybe we do with these early picks. Maybe we do take Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey. Maybe we do end up with a Malik Neighbors. Maybe we do take these players. Maybe this is where we go all in offensively. We're bringing in Clint Kubiak. We have Alvin Kamara coming back. We have Chris Olave entering his prime. Rashid Shaheed. We've got all these players. Maybe this is where you say, you know what? Let's go all in offensively. Let's hope that Dennis can write the defense and make the defense good as it is. There are players over there. There is Demario Davis. There are good players on the defensive side of the ball. So that's not a horrible idea. It really isn't, to just say, you know what? Okay, let's push. Let's push here. Like a Dunze. If a Dunze falls and you take a Dunze at 14, you trade up to get him or whatever, and you end up entering the season with all of a sudden Chris Olave and a Dunze out wide, and Rashid Shaheed is your third wide receiver, and Alvin Kamara, and you could do worse than that. That's what I'm saying with the Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey thing, where if these guys pan out and you've got I always reference these players for the Rams, but if you end up after this year and you're like, man, we just drafted, Puka Nacua and Sam Laporta, because those were rookies last year. So if you end up with Sam Laporta and Puka Nacua and Brock Bowers and Lat McConkey, that's a really nice place to be in. I don't care who your quarterback is. If it's Derek Carr or if we're moving away from Carr, and all of a sudden, you're sitting there and you're like, man, we've got a top 5 wide receiver. We've got, a top 5 tight end. We've got maybe one of the best wide receiver rooms in the NFL with Chris Olave and Odunze or McConkey or whoever ends up being. I don't hate that. I don't hate the idea of just kind of bucking the trend and bucking the consensus and just saying let's get this offense right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a thought that defensively, DA is a good enough defensive mind that the defense is going to be fine. And they've still got enough players, enough playmakers to where, and a strategist that head coach / defensive coordinator in this Allen, where they're going to be fine. But this whole thing hinges on getting the most out of Derek Carr to get back into the postseason, but obviously a new offensive coordinator. And I think, you mentioned wide receiver, but I also feel like we've been waiting forever for an athletic tight end to emerge. Think about how many times we've been thinking and talking about, this could be the next tight end. This could be the next tight end. It just has never materialized really since Jimmy Graham the first go around, if you want to be honest, in terms of playmakers at that position. But I thought DA kind of showed his hand a little bit at either the combine or the NFL owners meetings, where he said, he clarified pass catcher. So that could either be a pass catching tight end or a wide receiver. Clearly, they want to add another sort of athletic person in the passing game to help Derek Carr, who's always flourished when he's had sort of playmaking tight end.
Darren Waller and
Kobe Fleener. Jared Cook, Ben Watson, Adam Troutman. We can go down the list, man. They have been searching. You're right. They've never found the guy. We thought Juwan Johnson might be the guy. If that guy's on the board, it wouldn't surprise me. A couple more for you here. Sean Fazand's with us, Fox 8, on Twitter at Sean Fazand.
But see, the more we're talking about it, the more it's you know what? Maybe filling in offensive line at 14, maybe we're a little early on that. This is exactly why I say, have you ever heard the old adage that a financial advisor never gets fired for recommending you buy IBM stock? It's that is the safe, boring, easy, no risk, no reward thing. It's just they started off this video with the consensus is at 14 we take a tackle. That's just the hey man, you got a hot stock tip for me? Yeah, buy Microsoft. Okay, sweet. Okay, that's not whatever. That's just going to be nice and even keel. We're cool. We're not going to get too high, not going to get too low here. And I'm not saying we should take Bowers and McConkey. I'm not saying we should trade up for a Dunze. But the more you talk it out, the more it's well, we could go in a bunch of different directions. Why enter that creative space with got to be a tackle, got to take a tackle at 14, got to build the interior line. Enter the space with anything can happen. Enter the space with we're going to be proactive. We're going to move the chessboard. We're not going to wait and see what happens. We're going to make this happen. That's how the Saints should enter the draft. Should enter the draft space. That's how they should be in the war room right now. They should be moving pieces around. They should be saying, well, do we want to take a shot at Lat McConkey in the second round? Hey, do we want to try and move up and get Malik Neighbors or someone like that? Do we want to get Brock Bowers? Is that a real possibility? What about if we trade down and take whatever defensive player and then we take a lineman here? We should be getting really creative. We have got to, and that's my big problem with this tackle thing, is that we can't keep thinking like every average team has thought for the last 25 years. We've got to be thinking next level. We got to be evolving. We've got to be pushing. We got to be growing with the NFL, grow with how the game is growing. We can't sit back and say, well, you got to run the football on first down and, 4 yards on a cloud of dirt. It'll get you, get you a first down, and then we'll just run the football down the field. We'll win 13-10 games, and we want to play gritty. Leave all that stuff behind. Let's get different. Let's get new. Let's be thought-provoking. Let's break the mold. That's where the front office needs to be. If we really want to compete with these teams who are doing that, teams that are pushing this new style, teams that are evolving and building a roster differently, and they're reaping the rewards of it. We've got to do that. And that's why I can't. The opposite of that is, don't worry about it. We're taking a tackle at 14. Got to be an O-line. Just draft defensive players. Defense wins championships. Just take some rotational interior defensive linemen. Like, that's the opposite of that thinking.
Fox 8, you'll give him a follow. Do you have any sense as to whether or not they might add anybody else via free agency before the draft?
Well, they added a linebacker today, a reserve linebacker that's going to play some special teams with Khalid Hudson, was in Washington for 4 seasons. Yeah, it could be sort of that minor one-year deal, depth type player. I am a little surprised they haven't gone out and signed, just even if it's a 32-year-old tackle, just someone, just because of the optics of how big that hole looks at 2 spots.
Well, I'm okay with waiting. I'm okay with waiting until the draft, or I don't blame the Saints for I don't blame them for not signing free agents until that happens. I mean, we're 2 weeks away, so we're 2 weeks away ish, and some change from the draft. So I would let things shake out before you start signing people.
Spots when you talk about the tackle position, and it was so frankly upfront with the Ryan Ramczyk situation and how they're discouraged about where he's at from a health perspective that. I'm surprised that they haven't at least gone out and brought back Andrews Pete or signed a veteran just for the sake of, we need somebody there that could just, if for nothing else, compete at that spot. Certainly possible that could still happen. And it's certainly possible after the draft. There's always that late May, June wave where guys that you don't necessarily think are there, but they're there, and you might bring a guy in at that time. So I don't think they're done.
That's another point too. Is like, you might sign an undrafted free agent. Like that might be who you bring in, instead of a 32-year-old. So you just got at this point in the season, you got to kind of let it shake out and let, you don't want to go sign some random 32-year-old free agent. And then after the draft, you're like, damn, I wish we had that roster spot.
Done with signing, players outside of the draft, but the big names, I think, obviously, are with other teams.
Yeah, they've usually been pretty active later in free agency. Just cap situations don't always allow them to be super active at the beginning. Say if a guy like Derek Carr or something like that. What if you had a perfect scenario for this draft, would it involve drafting a quarterback?
Good question, Matt. If I was to build a perfect draft, like if it was the perfect situation, I think a quarterback would be in there, but it's not dependent on the quarterback being in there. So like I would have multiple versions of a perfect draft. I mean, just like I talked about, if we took Bowers and McConkey, and then in the 3rd round we took Jordan Travis, to me that's a perfect draft. If we took Jared Verse in the 1st round, traded up for an offensive lineman, and then in the 3rd round took defensive tackle, the Texas defensive tackle, that's a perfect draft. Like so I can see it a bunch of different ways. I think if I did a simulation of 1,000 of my perfect drafts, I think a majority of the time a quarterback would be there in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. And one of the 3, I think Spencer Rattler, Michael Pratt, or Jordan Travis would be the 3 that I would look at. Like, okay, this is probably the value position that we could take a quarterback. We used our earlier picks on impact players. Let's add this quarterback to a very weak quarterback room. I think that'd be okay. But like I said, if we ended up taking, all kind of these other players, and it just the chips fell where they did, and there wasn't a quarterback, if we nail those other picks, I'd be totally fine with that too. So I lean yes, but I'm not banging on the table like we have to get a quarterback or this is a failed draft. Just like I'm not saying we have to get a lineman in the 1st round or this is a failed draft. Just like I'm not saying we have to get a tight end in this draft or it's a failed draft. Like, there is a bunch of different quote-unquote perfect combinations.
Me personally, no. Okay. Unless it was one of the top guys that really had slipped and fell in the 1st round at 14. I'm not crazy in love with the idea of another mid-round, maybe this guy can develop into something. I think they kind of took that route last year with Jake Haener. But if you liked a guy with a 1st round grade at 14 and he was one of the top 3, if we had a crazy slide with the top 4 quarterbacks that are certainly the ones we're talking about. All of a sudden, that player was available at 14. That could potentially, you think the guy's got franchise material and could potentially, reset the franchise, and possibly, or, if you had a first-round grade on a guy and at 45, maybe he's within reach to go up a couple spots.
I would guess the grades on Pratt, Rattler, and Travis are way higher than the normal picks, the normal like 3rd round, 4th round quarterback prospects. I would guess their grades are on average way higher.
And get maybe, but only if, in my opinion, only if you think that guy can be a starter at some point. But
I think it'd be problematic. I completely disagree with this. I think it would be problematic if the Saints just so happened to take Drake May. Like if it just so happened he fell, whatever, we ended up taking Drake May, because then it's like, oh damn, well now it shifts everything, because now it's like, well, we got Carr, we're paying him all this money, but now we're kind of building for May. Now we have to kind of develop him. Like how does that shift? How does that now shift all these other players? Like how does Drake May's timeline shift with Marshawn Lattimore and Demario Davis and Tyrann Mathieu and Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara? Like now we got to kind of change the window of opportunity and what we're building and how we're roster building. That is a much more difficult puzzle to do than we took Spencer Rattler in the 4th round. He's going to sit for a couple of years, then we'll see what happens. So I don't really like this line of thinking either.
I don't necessarily think it's the gotta have scenario that last year. I knew they were going to invest in a young player because it was something that they had wanted to do. But this year, I know they're high on Jake Haener. So if it's another, hey, we might develop this guy into a backup, I don't know if they go that route this year.
He's on Twitter at Sean Fazan, Fox 8. Make sure you follow him there. Good stuff, man. Always great to chat. Thanks for a couple of minutes.
All right, man.
All right, there you go. So we're ranking the Saints draft needs. I think the top 3, like I said, to recap in no particular order: offensive line, edge, and other draft picks. Beyond that, every position. We got to be going into this with open eyes, clear heart, empty conscience, whatever the phrase is. We got to be coming into it with just pure creativity, Bob Ross levels of creativity here. Happy little accidents all throughout the draft, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments below, what is your ranking of the Saints NFL draft needs? I will see you in the next video.